What is your assessment of what's going on in these markets?
It's an interesting set of circumstances right now. If you were to look at the export and import growth numbers as just came out, one could read into them signs of economic strength. After all, very strong import growth, and it was resoundingly strong, suggests that there is strong demand momentum in China still. The export growth numbers were also pretty good. So, in normal circumstances, it might all have added up to a positive sign. But as they say, context is everything. And the smaller trade surplus is certainly creating some concerns about potential balance of payments financing difficulties. And given the recent history about China having concerns about its capital flows and clamping down on capital
Hmm.
outflows, I think there was a concern that could dominate the yuan, and that I think is what is showing up in the yuan depreciation.
And we were just talking, though, about what appears to be somewhat of a pause in intervention, though, when we talk about restrictions on capital outflows, at least on the equity side, there hasn't been the presence of the national team so far. What does this suggest to you, if anything?
It possibly suggests that the PBOC in particular, at least in the foreign exchange market and perhaps the government more broadly in the financial markets, are taking a step back. And as Bernie had suggested, maybe letting markets play out a little bit because this is a good time to do what they've been talking about doing, which is to let the markets discipline themselves to some extent. And when markets around the world are selling off, it doesn't look that bad for China. And perhaps it is something that they can ride through. So this is a good currency market because again, this is their stated policy. So it may just be them reacting to markets. If the fall were to sharpen very significantly in either the equity market or the currency market, I think we will see some significant intervention to calm things down. But I don't think we are at that point yet.
Right. Dr. Prasad, I mean, the strength I mean, in a way, it's not, in a way, the strength of the renminbi is contributing to the chaos in the world markets, isn't it? I mean, China doesn't necessarily want the currency at the level it is, but this is no time for them to be recycling that kind of capital into the markets. I mean, at this point, you know, that old cliche, cash is king. I mean, it applies to the foreign reserves that the country has accumulated, and they've gone up for 12 consecutive months. I mean, this is no time to be footloose and easy with those FX reserves, is it? I mean, at a time like this, when you don't know which way the markets are going to go, you're just going to sit there and wait for things to settle down and establish some sort of stability before you sit down and decide which way you want to make your commitments, right? I mean, this is a kind of a dicey time to be making rash decisions.
This is certainly not a time to act precipitously, and I don't think the Chinese authorities are acting precipitously at this stage. Certainly, there have been some significant market moves, but nothing that, from the Chinese perspective at least, should incite any significant panic. And even the moves that we've been talking about in the yuan, as you pointed out earlier, Bernie, the drop in the yuan yesterday came after quite a few days of strengthening. So it's just a very modest correction. And at this stage, it's certainly not anything to get excited about. But there is the prospect of further monetary tightening in the US. And if there is a continued stock market route around the world, you could have safe haven flows
Right.
to the dollar that strengthen the dollar, which in turn could have some pressures on the yuan. Because if the dollar were to strengthen, that could put some downward pressure on the yuan if people don't believe that the yuan can sustain that level against the dollar. So I think right now we're just seeing some nervousness in the market. But I think the Chinese government is by and large holding its fire, except, of course, for this liquidity injection, which is sort of typical at this time of the year.